The small UK town of Hill came alive every year with the flickering neon lights of its annual street carnival. A young woman walked through the stalls with her new boyfriend, James, enjoying the simple pleasure of overpriced local cheese. The sound of a struggling local marching band filled the air as elderly men in vintage gear paraded past. Behind the band followed a troupe of clowns, their movements erratic and clumsy under the blistering sun. One particular clown caught James's eye, a lanky figure with green tufts of hair who seemed to be staring directly at them. The figure broke rank, shoving a trumpet player aside as he barreled toward the couple with a look of pure malice. As he got closer, the woman realized the man beneath the melting grease paint was her ex-boyfriend, A.M. He stood there in his oversized shoes, accusing her of moving on too quickly despite years of silence. In a bizarre attempt at sentiment, he began to misquote a famous scene from the movie Notting Hill. The absurdity of the situation caused the woman to laugh, a reaction that shattered his fragile composure. His hand reached into his back pocket and emerged holding a jar filled with a cloudy, sinister liquid. A caustic, burning smell filled the air as the lid came off, alerting the couple to the danger. Suddenly, another clown named Len, a large and acrobatic performer, saw the threat and leapt toward them. A.M. threw the liquid just as Len slammed into the woman, shielding her from the brunt of the attack. A splash of the substance hit her shoulder, and she felt an immediate searing heat against her skin. While she struggled, James tackled A.M. to the ground, his protective instincts turning into a brutal assault. Len had taken the liquid directly to his face, his thick grease paint acting as an accidental, neutralizing barrier. The woman used her own soaked t-shirt to wipe Len's eyes, desperately trying to save the man who had saved her. The acid, stolen from a school chemistry lab where A.M. worked as a janitor, was fortunately not at full potency. Even so, it left permanent scars on Len's hairline and minor burns on the woman's shoulder. Police flooded the scene, pulling James off the bloodied ex-boyfriend before he could do more damage. A.M. was eventually sentenced to prison, though he was granted leniency for not pressing charges against James. Today, the woman lives with a restraining order, a constant reminder of the day a joke turned deadly. She still views A.M. as an insult to clowns everywhere, a pathetic figure who tried to ruin her life. But the carnival continues every year, its bright lights hiding the shadows of the past. Every time she hears the sound of a marching band, the smell of chemicals seems to return. People often ask why she hates the Notting Hill Carnival, but few would believe the truth. The incident left a lasting impression on the local community, making them wary of the strangers in paint. James and the woman remained together, their bond forged in the chaos of that afternoon. As for A.M., he remains a cautionary tale of obsession and the madness that fairgrounds can bring out. Some say you can still see the ghost of his rage in the eyes of the performers who come to town. Never trust a man in grease paint who seems to know your name. The laughter of the crowd often drowns out the screams of those targeted by their past. Vigilance is the only prize worth winning at a place like this. A.M.'s plan was calculated, but he didn't count on the heroism of a complete stranger. The physical wounds healed, but the psychological impact remained etched in her mind forever. She often wonders if Len knows how much his intervention meant that day. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you once thought you loved. He wanted to leave a permanent mark, and in a way he succeeded. To A.M., she has only one message: you will always be a pile of crap and an insult to clowns. I have always been a massive fan of horror movies, even from a very young age. I used to convince my babysitters to let me watch my parents' collection of horror VHS tapes. I would always promise them that I wouldn't have any nightmares, and usually I kept that promise. However, there was one specific movie that absolutely terrified me beyond reason. That movie was Ghoulies 2, a film that most people would consider a silly horror comedy. One particular scene burned itself into my impressionable young mind. In the movie, a clown sits on the dunk tank until a fish-like monster leaps out and bites his arm off. In my 6-year-old brain, I became convinced that every dunk tank at a fairground contained real monsters. I was mortified to learn that my father, a sheriff's deputy, was scheduled to be the clown in the dunk tank at our local fair. I begged him not to do it, asking why he would risk his life for a silly game. He just laughed it off, completely unaware of the cinematic horrors I had witnessed. When the night of the fair arrived, I was absolutely terrified for my father's safety. My mother threatened to take me home if I didn't stop crying, so I forced myself to be brave. I watched with horror as they began to fill the massive 8-foot-tall tank with water. My father climbed up onto the small wooden seat, dressed in a ridiculous sheriff clown costume. The large ruff around his neck prevented him from looking down into the water below. I decided that I would do everything in my power to prevent anyone from hitting the target. Every time someone would aim a ball, I would cough or scream to mess up their concentration. It actually seemed to be working as ball after ball missed the metal target. Seeking a more permanent solution, I crept around to the back of the attraction. There, I spotted 3 older teenagers lurking in the darkness near the base of the tank. I realized they were using knives to pierce the thick plastic lining of the tank. One of them whispered that this would put a stop to that monster. I thought they were talking about the ghoulie fish and that they were trying to save my dad. I actually thanked them for their help, which caused them to laugh hysterically. I watched as the water began to drain rapidly into a nearby drainage ditch. Because of the height of the tank, nobody in the front could see the water level dropping. I ran back around to the front, feeling a sense of victory and peace. My father continued to taunt the crowd, completely unaware that he was sitting over an empty abyss. Suddenly, a local man stepped up and threw a perfect strike right at the center of the target. I watched in slow motion as the seat gave way and my father vanished into the tank. A sickening metallic thud echoed through the air, followed by a scream that I will never forget. People began screaming and rushing toward the tank as the carnival atmosphere turned into chaos. I kept jumping up and down, trying to see if the ghoulie had finally gotten him. What actually happened was far worse. My father had fallen 10 feet onto a dry, concrete hard floor. He had shattered his ankle and broken several bones in his leg because there was no water to break his fall. I watched as paramedics loaded him into an ambulance, realizing that my saviors had nearly killed him. I kept my secret for years, terrified that I would be blamed for the investigation that followed. The injury forced my father into early retirement from the police force, changing our lives forever. Decades later, at my own wedding, I finally confessed the truth to him while we were both a bit tipsy. To my shock, he laughed and told me they had known all along that I was involved. But as I looked at the old carnival grounds that night, I wondered if the teenager's intent had been far darker than I ever realized. Back in the mid-'80s, my friends and I were the kind of thrill-seekers who thrived on the sketchy atmosphere of local county fairs. We lived for the rickety, poorly maintained rides that felt like they might fall apart at any second. There was a specific coastal fun fair in our town that was notorious for its blatant disregard for safety regulations. We were all convinced that local officials were taking bribes to sign off on the safety checks for those death trap machines. On this particular day, our group consisted of 5 of us, including my friend Isla, who had bright green permed hair. Then there was Tony, who stood out because he chose to dress exactly like a boring 50-year-old dad from the 50s. Despite looking like a human Tetris piece in his chinos and sweater vest, Tony was the wildest and most unpredictable person I knew. As we were wandering the boardwalk, Tony suddenly stopped and gestured for us to duck into a narrow alleyway. He pointed toward a small maintenance shed where 2 carnival workers were having a hushed, serious conversation. They were talking about a specific roller coaster carriage having a faulty safety bar that wouldn't lock properly. Tony's eyes lit up with a dangerous glint as he whispered that we were going to ride that specific coaster. He had always dreamed of what he called bareback riding a roller coaster without any restraints. The rest of us refused to be that stupid, so we stayed on the ground to watch him attempt the stunt alone. Tony boarded the ride and gave us a cocky wink as the employee pushed the bar down, failing to notice it didn't click. The machinery groaned to life and the carriage began its slow, clicking ascent up the first massive hill. We could see him near the top, using one hand to hold the bar steady and the other to grip the side of the car. For a moment, it looked like he was actually going to pull off the most insane feat of our youth. At the very crest of the incline, Tony let go of his grip to give us one final, celebratory thumbs up. But he had tragically misjudged the exact second the carriage would lurch forward into the steep descent. In an instant, the centrifugal force catapulted Tony's body out of the seat and high into the air. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as we watched him arc across the sky like a rag doll. I could swear I saw a peaceful smile on his face as he flew, though it may have just been my imagination. Screams erupted all around the boardwalk as other fairgoers realized they were witnessing a fatal accident. I began to run toward the dark tree line behind the park where I saw his body disappear from view. I was the first to reach the scene, but what I found among the trees was no longer a recognizable human form. The impact had been so violent that it looked as if his body had literally exploded upon hitting the ground. The shock hit me deep in my soul, a cold weight that I have carried every day for the last few decades. I still see that horrific arc through the air in my nightmares at least once every month. Unsurprisingly, the fun fair was forced to close down immediately following the investigation into Tony's death. It eventually reopened years later under new management, but the stain of that night never truly faded. Tony's family attempted to sue the park for negligence, but the case became complicated during the depositions. Two of our friends had to admit under oath that Tony had overheard the workers and knowingly rode the faulty car. Even though he was only 21, I think Tony would have loved the irony of his own spectacular exit. I miss his ridiculous humor every day, but I find comfort in hoping he's laughing somewhere in the afterlife. However, the legal battle revealed that the carnival workers weren't just negligent, they were hiding something more. During the trial, a witness mentioned seeing a dark figure tampering with the track just before Tony boarded. The workers' union had been in a violent dispute with the management that very week. I began to wonder if Tony hadn't just been a victim of his own stupidity, but a pawn in a much deadlier game. Just as the truth seemed ready to surface, the lead investigator of the case mysteriously vanished. As I walked past the now silent rides years later, I saw a familiar beige tank top fluttering from the top of the coaster track. Growing up outside of Phoenix in the 70s meant we were poorer than dirt and twice as rough. We lived by a survival instinct that most city kids wouldn't understand in a million years. When the Stanfolk Family Carnival pitched their tents in Poddington's Field, we saw more than just rides. To us, it was an excuse to cause trouble and prove that no traveling carny could knock us off our pedestals. You have to understand that carnival folk are a breed apart, showing loyalty that rivals any military unit. We rolled up in Pete's old pickup truck with the singular goal of beating them at their own rigged games. My girlfriend had her eyes set on a massive plush octopus at the prize booth, green and as big as a St. Bernard. I headed straight for the shooting range, confident in the skills I'd honed shooting cans in the desert. I quickly realized the sights were incorrectly calibrated, a classic trick to make you miss those first vital shots. Even after adjusting my aim and downing 10 ducks, the attendant pointed to microscopic fine print about consecutive hits. At the ring toss, the rings were physically too small to fit over the blocks unless dropped perfectly from above. The carny even gave me a loser ticket, mocking my skills to bait me into spending more money. I had only $20 left from my paycheck, meant to last the month, and I was running out of options. I went back to the prize tent alone and tried to bribe the young attendant to just sell me the octopus outright. He told me his father would skin him alive if he let it go for anything less than 100 tickets. That was when I spotted the opportunity and pointed toward the Ferris wheel, screaming that it was on fire. As the attendant turned his head, I vaulted the counter and snatched the heavy green plush in one smooth motion. I sprinted down the fairway, hollering for my friends to get to the truck as the alarm was raised. Suddenly, a mountain of a man holding a heavy iron chain stepped out from between the trailers to block my path. His name tag simply read Stan Stanfolk, and the look in his eyes promised a world of pain. I shouted that I wouldn't have to steal if their damn games had even an ounce of honor in them. Stanfolk growled that he was going to chain us to his bike and drag us through the dirt until we begged. Chaos erupted behind me as my friends started smashing up the game booths with anything they could find. While Stanfolk was momentarily distracted by the sound of breaking wood, I shoulder-charged him with everything I had. I managed to snatch the chain from his hand and threw it into the darkness before resuming my escape. We piled into the back of Pete's truck, tires screaming as we tore out of the Poddington field. Looking back, I saw 3 motorcycles with roaring engines and blinding headlights following us onto the main road. In a moment of sheer idiocy, I stood up in the truck bed and waved the octopus to taunt our pursuers. A sudden jolt of the truck sent the massive plush flying from my grip and into the blackness of the desert. All that violence and effort was gone in an instant, swallowed by the Arizona sands. The carnies eventually gave up the chase, likely fearing the police more than they valued a stuffed toy. The next day, the entire carnival had vanished from the field, leaving nothing but flattened grass and trash. My girlfriend broke up with me immediately, unimpressed by my display of senseless vandalism. I searched that stretch of road for hours, but the octopus was never seen again. Decades later, as a veteran, I look back on that night with a deep sense of shame. I often wonder about the Carney family and the mysterious donation I send them every month to make amends. But the desert has a way of keeping things, and some debts are never truly settled. As I drove past that old field recently, I noticed a strange, tall figure standing by the roadside. He was holding something green and ragged that looked suspiciously like a tattered stuffed animal. When I looked in the rearview mirror to get a better look, the figure was gone, leaving only a single carnival ticket fluttering in the wind. The single carnival ticket fluttered into the darkness, leaving me alone with the silence of the fairground. Long before that night, my grandmother lived through a different kind of carnival nightmare in the summer of 1967. She was a stunning young woman back then, possessing the kind of grace that commanded attention at every local event. When she turned 18, she decided to enter the state beauty pageant held at the Grand State Fair. To her surprise, she quickly advanced through the ranks and made it to the prestigious state finals. The judging panel consisted of high-profile local figures, including the mayor and the state governor. For the most part, the atmosphere was wholesome and respectful, focusing on poise and local pride. However, that sense of security was shattered during the preparations for the first catwalk round. The dressing room door burst open while the 5 contestants were in the middle of changing. A man in a law enforcement uniform stepped into the room, claiming to be a sheriff's deputy. He dismissed their modesty with a casual laugh, claiming he had a wife and daughters their age. He informed them that a dangerous prowler had been reported lurking near the dressing room windows. My grandmother looked at the window, which was 8 feet off the ground and far too small for anyone to peek through. Under the guise of protection, the deputy refused to leave, standing guard while the girls dressed. The girls felt forced to continue their preparations under his unblinking, predatory gaze. Over the next 3 months of the competition, he was always there, appearing whenever they needed to change. The tension reached a breaking point during the highly anticipated swimsuit round of the finals. One of the more outspoken girls finally told him that his presence was entirely inappropriate and unwelcome. The deputy's expression darkened as he gripped his official badge and warned her about obstruction of justice. Terrified but smart, the girls formed a tight circle to block his view while each one took turns changing. The deputy stood in the corner, visibly seething as his opportunity to peer at them was thwarted. After the final round ended, the girls were relieved to find that the strange deputy had finally vanished. During the post-pageant celebration, my grandmother crossed paths with the actual town sheriff. When she mentioned the deputy who had been guarding them, the sheriff's face turned a ghostly shade of white. He revealed that his new deputy had never shown up for his first day of work at the pageant. The description my grandmother provided didn't match the actual deputy, who was a large, red-headed man. Soon after, the real deputy was found in the woods, bound and stripped of his uniform and sidearm. The stolen firearm was discovered abandoned in a trash can right outside the pageant hall. My grandmother tried to move on, but the memory of that fake deputy's eyes never truly left her. Years later, in 1978, she was living a peaceful life as a mother and wife. One evening, she and her husband were watching a popular TV game show. Suddenly, she pointed at the screen and screamed that she recognized one of the contestants. There, on the dating game, was the man with the distinctive jawline who had haunted her pageant days. The man on the screen was introduced to the audience as Rodney Alcala. It was only later that the world would learn his true name, the dating game killer. The realization that she had been trapped in a room with the serial killer sent a shiver through her soul. She wondered how many other girls had crossed his path during those long summer months at the fair. The bright lights of the carnival had provided the perfect cover for a monster in a stolen uniform. But as one shadow faded into history, a new threat was brewing in the modern world of digital rivalries. Little did Hank know, a vengeful opponent was already watching him from across the crowded fairground, holding something far more dangerous than a game piece. Hank clutched his plastic model case tightly as he wove through the thick crowds of the state fair. The memory of the threatening messages on the gaming forum felt like ice in his veins. He had laughed off the user Deathbringer when the digital threats first began. But now the sight of a tall man in a dark hoodie across the midway changed everything. Hank ducked behind a popcorn stand to break the line of sight. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He peered out, hoping the man had been a mere figment of his paranoia. Instead, the hooded figure was now 20 feet closer, still staring directly at him. Hank bolted toward the tilt-a-whirl, desperate to lose himself in the crowd. The screaming of children and the mechanical roar of the rides became a deafening wall of sound. He pushed past a group of teenagers sharing cotton candy. Every tall man in a jacket now looked like his digital executioner. He ducked into the House of Mirrors, thinking the maze would provide cover. Inside, his own terrified reflection mocked him from 100 different angles. A soft thud of footsteps echoed behind him, out of sync with his own. A flash of a dark hoodie appeared in a mirror 3 rows back. Hank felt his way along the cold glass, his fingers leaving greasy smudges. "I told you I'd find you, Hank," a low voice whispered from the reflections. The stalker wasn't just here to scare him, he was here to settle a score over a game of dice and plastic soldiers. Hank found the exit and burst out into the cool night air. He ran toward the parking lot, away from the safety of the lights. The gravel crunched loudly under his sneakers, announcing his position. He reached his old sedan and fumbled with the keys. The metal was cold and his hands were sweating too much to grip the key properly. He knelt down to find them, and that's when he saw the boots. Heavy, mud-caked combat boots stood just inches from his face. "Please, it was just a game," Hank whimpered, looking up at the towering figure. The stalker didn't speak. He only reached into his pocket and pulled out a jagged piece of metal. Hank kicked out at the man's shins and scrambled under the neighboring SUV. The smell of oil and old rubber filled his lungs as he crawled to the other side. He emerged on the far side and started screaming for help. But the music from the fair was too loud, drowning out his cries. He saw a security guard's flashlight bobbing near the entrance. He ran toward the light, ignoring the sharp pain in his side. A hand grabbed his messenger bag, jerking him backward with violent force. The plastic case containing his precious miniatures shattered on the ground. Hank hit the dirt hard, the wind knocked out of him. The stalker stood over him, the shadow of his hood hiding everything but a cruel grin. "You cheated me of my victory, Hank," the man hissed, raising his arm. Just as the sharp metal began its descent, A pair of headlights swung around the corner, illuminating the scene in a blinding white glare. The blinding headlights revealed only a confused security guard, not a second attacker. The silence that followed the chaos was heavier than the screams that preceded it. In the weeks following the acid attack, the local council launched a full investigation into carnival safety protocols. Len the clown still carries the faint white lines of scars along his hairline where the grease paint failed him. The legal system proved to be just as rigged as the games we tried to beat. My father's early retirement from the police force was a quiet end to a career of service. He never blamed the kids who drained the tank, choosing to see the humor in a dark situation. Yet every time I see a carnival flyer, the sound of that cracking bone echoes in my mind. The forest behind the park where Tony fell remained cordoned off for months during the cleanup. We found out later that the park owners had filed for bankruptcy to avoid the massive lawsuits. I still send those monthly donations to the Stanfolk family, a silent apology for my youthful rage. The carnival industry is a closed circle, and word of our vandalism traveled faster than we did. The fake deputy was never caught, disappearing into the 1967 summer haze without a trace. Seeing Rodney Alcala on TV years later felt like a cold hand tightening around my throat. Psychiatric reports on the Warhammer Stalker revealed a deep-seated inability to distinguish reality from the game. He spent his court-mandated therapy sessions complaining about his tournament ban instead of his assault charges. Hank still plays the game, but he never uses the army that caused so much trouble. My husband and I often talk about how lucky we were to survive our own stupidity. These stories aren't just memories, they are warnings etched into our skin and history. Behind every spinning light and sugary treat, there is a risk we all silently accept. I still wake up at night hearing the distant sound of carnival calliope music playing in the wind. The predators who haunt these places never really go away, they just wait for the next season. Most of the carnival workers I met were just trying to survive, trapped in a cycle of poverty and travel. But the few who meant us harm left a stain on the community that no amount of time can wash away. The town eventually banned traveling fairs altogether, ending a century-long tradition. We traded our excitement for a sterilized kind of safety that feels hollow. Now, I always check the bolts on the rides before I let my grandkids get on them. Tony's parents never quite recovered from the news that their son had intentionally bypassed safety bars. They preferred the lie of a mechanical failure over the truth of a fatal prank. I sometimes wonder if the acid attacker is still out there watching from the edge of the crowd. His restraining order is just a piece of paper that won't stop a jar of liquid. The experience taught me that the most dangerous monsters don't hide under the bed, they work at the ticket booth. Memories of that summer in Phoenix are blurred by the heat and the desert dust. I wonder if that giant green octopus is still buried under the sand somewhere, bleached white by the sun. Life moves on, but the events of those few nights defined the people we became. We carry these stories like heavy luggage, occasionally opening them to warn others of the weight. The fair will return next year, and new victims will walk through those gates with smiles on their faces. They won't see the rust on the tracks or the malice in the eyes of the strangers they pass. Some secrets of the fairground are better left buried in the mud and the sawdust. But as I was cleaning out my attic today, I found a Polaroid of the beauty pageant that showed a second shadow standing right behind us. That Polaroid photo remained in my hand for hours as the attic grew cold around me. It served as a final, physical proof that the monsters we fear are rarely hidden in the woods. They are standing right behind us, bathed in the same neon glow we find so enchanting. We often view the traveling fair as a temporary escape from the mundane reality of our lives. But we forget that the very nature of the traveling fair is what makes it so dangerous. These operations arrive under the cover of night and vanish just as quickly. They bring with them a cast of strangers whose backgrounds are often as murky as the oil on their machines. For a predator, there is no better hunting ground than a place where everyone is a transient. The loud music and screaming crowds provide the perfect acoustic camouflage for a struggle. The bright, flashing lights mask the movements of those who don't wish to be seen. Throughout these stories, we have seen how quickly a day of fun can turn into a lifetime of regret. We saw a man lose his life in a dunk tank because of a child's innocent nightmare. We witnessed the horrific result of an obsession that ended in a chemical attack. We felt the terror of an 18-year-old girl being hunted by a man with a badge and a killer's heart. These aren't just urban legends told to keep kids away from the tracks. They are the documented scars of people who survived the carnival's hidden teeth. I think back to the laughter I used to hear in these places. Now that laughter sounds more like a warning siren to my ears. The legal battles may have ended, but the vigilance must never stop. When you visit your next local fair, look past the prize booths and the fried food. Notice the exits, the blind spots, and the people who aren't there for the rides. Trust your instincts when the hair on the back of your neck begins to rise. That primal fear is often the only thing standing between you and a headline. As I pack away these memories tonight, I feel a strange sense of relief. The truth is finally out, and the ghosts of these stories can rest. But rest does not mean forgetfulness for those of us left behind. I wonder how many others have similar photos hidden in their own boxes. I wonder how many shadows are currently planning their next move for the coming season. The fairs will always return when the weather turns warm. They will set up their lights and promise a night of magic. And the smell of popcorn will once again mask the scent of danger. Don't let the music drown out your common sense. Keep your children close and your eyes open. We are the authors of our own safety in a world that often ignores it. These stories were shared not to scare you, but to prepare you. Many of those mentioned here didn't have the luxury of a warning. Their experiences are the legacy that we must carry forward. I am finally descending the stairs, leaving the darkness of the past behind me. May your next visit to the fair be filled only with the joy it promises. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember that the brightest lights always cast the darkest shadows.